Welcome back, guys. Welcome back to my channel called Construction Skills Online. My name is Sibusiso Mbanga, and remember, last week we started our first course, which is called Estimating and Tendering in Construction. We did Module 1 last week. Module 1 was composed of 3 lessons. Just a quick recap. Lesson 1 was about buying a tender document. Lesson number 2 was about when you've bought the document now you want to make a decision to see if you're going to do the tender or not. And then lesson number 3 was about the site inspection visit. All the things you need to note at the site inspection visit, the things you need to note when you're on the site, and even at the tender meeting itself. So those are the 3 lessons we've covered so far in our first module. And so this week we're going to look at module number 2. Module number 2 is called Preparing and Completing a Tender Document. Now this module has got 4 lessons, starting at lesson 4 and lesson 5, lesson 6, and lesson 7 and lesson 8. However, what we're going to do for the purposes of this week, we're only going to cover 2 lessons, lesson 4 and lesson 5. I will tell you the reason at the end. So let's jump right into it without wasting any time. Lesson number 4. In this lesson, we're going to be covering the relevant information that you need to be aware of in your tender document. Now, you've bought the document, you've been to the site, you've made a decision that, okay, fine, I'm going to do this work, I'm going to price this tender. You've got the document in your hand. So now you need to go through the document. It's usually a very, very thick volume. So you need to go through it, but you cannot read each and every single page of the document. You need to be aware of the relevant pages to read. Otherwise, it will take you quite a long time reading the whole document. So in this lesson, we're just going to be looking at the important things to note in the tender document itself. Now, any tender document is comprised mainly of 4 parts. You get the conditions of contract, you get the drawings, you get the specification, and of course, you get the schedule of quantities. Some people call it the bill of quantities or simply the BOQ. So those are the main components of your tender document. The conditions of contract is usually at the front, and it's usually the pink pages. If your document is multicolored, these would be the pink pages. And then the drawings are right at the back of the document. Obviously, the drawings are white. The specification is usually the blue pages. It's also towards the end of the document. And then the schedule of quantities, or the BOQ, is usually the yellow pages. That is where you're going to do your calculations. Okay, firstly, let's get into the conditions of contract. Okay, as you would know, that the construction industry in South Africa is regulated by what we call the CIDB. So the CIDB regulated that there's only there's only 4 general conditions of contract that are used in South Africa, and these are the GCC, the JBCC, the FIDIC, and the NEC. The GCC is what we're going to be working with in this training, and it's the most common form of the conditions of contract. This is usually for civil works, whether it's roads, whether it's pipelines, whether it's paving works, any form of civil works usually falls under what we call the GCC. And then the JBCC is usually the building works. So if you're gonna tender for a building contract, whether you're gonna be tendering for building a clinic or building RTP houses, excuse me, the conditions of contract you would normally use is what we call the JBCC. The FIDIC is the less common type of conditions of contract in South Africa, but that is usually used for maintenance work. Like for example, Sandrel likes using the FIDIC a lot on their maintenance contract on the national roads. So that is usually for maintenance work on the national roads. Usually it's used by Sandrel. They love it a lot. They use the FIDIC. They also use the GCC, but mostly they use the FIDIC. And then the NEC is usually used for electrical contracting. So you'd find that if you're an ESCOM contractor, the conditions of contract that you'd be dealing with as far as ESCOM works is concerned, that would be the NEC. Okay, next up we're going to be looking at the drawings. Now, as you all know, the drawings are so important because they're showing the details of all the components of the works. And the drawings play such a vital role when you're pricing your work. You could never ever price work accurately without having a look at the drawings, because there is just so much detail which is on the drawings which may not be on the actual bill of quantities. So you'd find that on the bill of quantities they would tend to refer you to a certain drawing number so that you can look at that drawing number when you are pricing that specific item. As I said, it's not possible to tender accurately without studying the drawings thoroughly. Let me give you an example. Just 3 weeks ago, I was pricing a tender for construction and installation of gabions. Now, the client, he gave us the drawings, and I saw on the drawings that some of the gabions were about 4 or 5 meters high. Now, it did not say the height of the gabions on the bill of quantities or anywhere else on the document. So if I had not seen that some of the gabions were going to be about 5 meters high, the way I would have priced it, perhaps I would not have included a machine like a TLB for backfilling, because when you're looking at a 4 meter height, you obviously need something like a TLB to help you backfill there. So if I had only thought that maybe at most these gabions would be 2 meters high, I would not have included a TLB when I was pricing the backfilling section of the works, or even putting the gabions, assembling the gabions. I would not have included that because I would not have known, because I haven't seen the actual drawings. So it's very important to study the drawings, to have a look at the drawings, to see the details on the drawings, because if you miss anything on the drawing, that could really, really, really cost you at the end. So if there's anything that's not clear, on the actual drawings themselves, it's always best just to give the consultant a ring and just to inquire rather than assume that this is what he meant, because an assumption can be very expensive at the end. Okay, now we look at the specification. Now the specification, it affects the rates. It tells you everything. It gives you the detail about the material quality that's going to be used, as well as the kind of workmanship that is expected of you from each and every single item. It gives specific descriptions of sometimes they even go to the extreme of even naming a preferred brand of material that you should use. So if you have not studied the specification and you use another way of pricing that item, but then when you get awarded, you see that, hey man, I was supposed to have priced this item using brand A, but then I priced using brand B. So that can be very, very, very costly at the end. And you also use the specification to get prices from your supplier, because the specification, as I said, as I just said, explained above, that it's very it gives you the details of the material. So normally when you're sending out a quotation to the supplier, you don't just send him the bill of quantities, but you would want to know the specification as well. For example, let me make an example of the gabions. There's many types of gabions. There can be gabions that are PVC coated, so the supplier would want to know exactly what the client wants, so that the supplier can quote you rather, on the exact item that you are looking for, not assume that this is what you'll be looking for. The specification also contains the clauses called measurement and payment that describes how the items have been measured and how. Okay, this one describes how the items have been measured and what work activity costs should be included in the rates. So basically, it tells you, okay, in this particular rate, this is what is included in this rate, and this is how you should do the work, you know. So now, when you know the how and you know what is included here, then you will know that, okay, when you are pricing that specific item, you have to price it in the way that they are saying it should be priced. For example, if they are saying that, let's just, for argument's sake, say you're doing a pipeline job. You're doing trench excavation. Now you're going to backfill and lay your pipe. Put your bedding, backfill, and everything. And they specify that they want 90% compaction. At 300 layers. So that means that you have to put certain amount of material, you compact to 90%, and then put the next 300 layer, compact to 90%. Now, if you don't compact to the specific required compaction density, when they do the test and they find that you are falling shy of that 90%, they could say, you know what, strip this whole trench, recompact, so that you can achieve 90% compaction. So it is very, very important to know exactly what you are pricing. When you are pricing a specific item, it is important to know what the client is expecting of you, what the level of work that you are expected to do, because I can assure you, when you are on site doing the work, the client will throw the book at you and he will say, hey, this is what you are supposed to have priced. This is how you are supposed to do this work, and anything that deviates from this is not acceptable. So it is very, very important to familiarize yourself with the specification. Now let's go to the schedule of quantities, or the better known as the BOQ. Okay, the schedule of quantities provides the following information on each item that needs to be priced. It provides reference to the applicable specification. What does that mean? As simple as this. On the specification, they describe each item, how it should be priced, and there's a code which will be allocated to each item under the specification. So now that code is taken to the front, is taken to the bill of quantities. It's normally the first column on your bill of quantities. Your bill of quantities, you normally have your specification. It would have a specific code there. So when you go to that item and you see there's a code, okay, on the specification, then what you would do to read more on that item, you'd have to go to the specification and see exactly what they say and see exactly how they prescribe that item should be priced, how they expect that work to be done. And then the second page, the second column rather, is usually the description of the specific item, and then you get the units of measurement, and then you get the estimated quantity. So on the bill of quantities, you will have what you call your reference column, and then you will have your description of the item, and then you will have the unit. It could be kilograms, meters, kilometers, square meters, some, and then you have the quantity. Let's just say, for example, you're going to be casting concrete. The unit will be cubic meters, and then you could have, say, an amount of 36 as a quantity, 36 cubic meters of 25 MPa concrete cast in situ. So that would be something typical on the bill of quantities. And then what you have to do then is to calculate the rate. You get a column for the rate. That's the one that you have to calculate, and then you have to take the rate, you multiply it out by the quantity, and then you will get your final amount. Okay, now let's just go a little bit deeper on the schedule of quantities. The pricing of contracts in the construction industry can be done in two ways. That is, you can price a contract by using the schedule of quantities. Usually now, if you're tendering on a government contract or any other government entity contract, what they do is they get the engineers or the quantity surveyors to draw up a bill of quantities, to draw up all the quantities. Say, for example, you're going to be building a house. They would have all the quantities of excavating the foundation, the quantities of pouring the concrete, the quantities of the amount of bricks on the wall, the number of doors, number of windows, and the purlines and the trusses and the roofing, whether it's tile or zinc. They would have all those quantities. So they've done all the work for you. So what you have to do is to put in a rate against each item. All the work has been done. You just have to put in a rate, have to calculate a rate against each item. The second way of pricing a contract is if the client gives you a drawing and he says, hey, give me a price. Typically this would be in the private sector. Say someone wants to build a house. They've got a plan for the house. They've spoken to the architect. They designed the house, and then and they got together with the structural engineer and the QS, and then they designed the house, and they're happy with everything. And then that client would approach you and give you the drawings, all the drawings you would need, and he says to you, "Can you quote me on building this house?" Now, what you have to do there is you have to work out the items from the drawings. In other words, you have to kind of draft your own schedule of quantities based on the information available on the drawings. Basically, you take that information on the drawings and you extrapolate it into a schedule of quantities. Now that's a lot of work. Now you've got to measure items, you've got to make sure the scale is correct, you've got to count, the doors and everything, so that you price everything that is there on the drawings, because you have not been given a schedule of quantities. Like I said, when you get a schedule of quantities, that is usually the easy way. But now, if you only get the drawing, now you have to draft up your own schedule of quantities, and on top of that, go and price that schedule of quantities. So that is a lot of work. Okay, in the schedule of quantities, the quantities of each item have already been measured. All you have to do is to price each item. Now, let's go to the fifth lesson. We only, now remember, this week we're only doing the theoretical part we're only doing the theoretical part of pricing the tender. We're going to get to the calculations. Now, lesson 5, we're dealing with the theory behind calculating the allowable cost. Basically, that means just calculating a rate. What is involved in putting up a rate together, in building a rate? What things must you take into account when you are uh, building up a rate? Now, a rate should cover all costs incurred in the process of construction as well as overhead costs and profit. The units of measurements are prescribed in a guide for determining and using quantities for civil engineering construction contracts. Okay, this is what I wanted to get to. One of the most important things when you're doing a rate, when you're building up a rate, is something called daily production. It is so important. It is so. What is daily production? Daily production is as simple as this. You can have daily production on it is the amount of time that your workers take to execute a certain task. Let's say you're pouring concrete for a foundation. Now you've got to know how much concrete, how many cubic meters of concrete that your team does in one day. Typically, concrete teams can do anything between 8 and 10 cubic meters of concrete a day. It is important to note that because that information is what you use. That information, you use that information for pricing the next tender. So you've always got to have a record of your daily productions. You have to have a record of, even if you are digging trenches. Say you're digging a trench on soft soil using a TLB. You've got to know how many meters a day that the TLB excavates on a certain width of a trench. Say the trench is 800 millimeter wide, and then the TLB, he does say 150 meters a day excavation, and say 600 deep. You have to have all that information. You have to write it down and say, okay, typically on a day, on these conditions, this is how much excavation we're going to be doing, because that information, when you collect that information, that's what you're going to be using in pricing the next job. Now, the easiest way to calculate a unit rate is to calculate the total daily cost. The total daily cost of doing a specific activity. Again, let's use the same example, the example of pouring concrete. You got to look at the people, you got to look at the material, you got to look at the equipment used, all the cost of all the daily cost of hiring a concrete mixer, hiring a poker vibrator, the daily cost of having a team of 6 laborers and a supervisor. Knowing that daily cost, this is what it costs to pour concrete in one day, and then you take the total cost, you divide it by the output of the team, you divide it by 8 cubic meters if they produce 8 cubic meters, and that will give you the rate. It's just so easy to calculate the rate. Remember, the cost itself might not change the total cost, but what will change a lot is what influences the rate is your total daily production. If your team is very sharp and they are quick and they know what they are doing, you are going to make more money because because now you are having a better output. But if your team is slow, and you're going to start losing money, and your rates are also going to be expensive, because if your team only produces 5 tubes of concrete, you will use that production rate to price your tender. And if my team does 10 cubes of concrete, you can imagine that your rate will be much higher than mine, and I might be having a better chance of securing that contract. So it's so important, to know what your the daily production. I'm just re-emphasizing that because it really really is important, guys. It's the key. It's the key. Having a record, have a journal of each job. If you do a job, have a record of, how long does it take you to excavate, how long does it take you to lay the pipe, how long does it take you to backfill, how long does it take you to pour concrete, how long does it take you to do ABC. Put all of that and keep it in a file. That information, you use it for other tenders. Okay, let's look at the total cost. It's made up of the following. Any rate is made up of material, the labor, the plant and equipment, and the fuel. Let's look at the material. You have to work out all the material required for the day's production. If you're doing concrete, you may have to calculate the amount of sand that goes into 1 cube of concrete, the amount of stone that goes into 1 cube of concrete, the amount of crusher dust, if you're going to be using crusher dust, the amount of cement, that goes into 1 cube of concrete. But don't worry, when we get to the calculations, which will be next week, I will show you guys how to calculate these things. I will take you step by step how to calculate all this material cost. And then you have to look at the plant and equipment costs. Is the plant hired or is it owned? It becomes simple when using, if your plant is hired, you simply put in the higher rate, and then you include the cost of fuel. Okay, the labor cost. For each activity, you've got to include all the labor that is involved in that activity, including the section leader, the operators, because those guys are not going to get paid elsewhere. They're getting paid, they're going to get paid, you're going to pay them from that specific item. So you've got to include all the labor involved in a specific item. The management, usually people like the health and safety officer, your site agents, your site engineers, usually those guys are paid under what you call the preliminary and general, also known as the P's and G's, so you wouldn't include them in the actual unit rates unless the tender you are pricing does not have a P and G section. They say include your P's and G's in the unit rate, then you would take that and you would include it in the unit rate. But I'm going to show you next week how to do all of that. Your fuel cost for your plant, you would also include that as a function of daily consumption. For example, typically a TLB you would use about, say, 15 liters an hour. So you would if you know that your TLB to hire at a dry rate, you say is 350 rand an hour, then you would add on a consumption of 15 liters of fuel an hour. You would add the cost of that fuel per hour onto the hourly rate. Okay, yeah, guys, so that basically is the lesson for this week. Remember, next week I will be doing a lot of, we're going to go deeper into calculations. We're actually going to do calculations. So next week I want you to bring in your calculators, your pens and papers. I'm going to just take you through how to actually do the calculations. We've dealt with a lot of theory at this stage, but yeah, next week we're going to be doing some calculations. So I hope you have a very, very productive week, and yeah, enjoy yourself, and yeah, just drop me a comment, just tell me, just tell me things that you need clarity on, or alternatively you can just download this on your laptop and watch it over and over, or just watch it on my YouTube channel. You can just rewind. I know I went a little bit fast, but you can always just rewind and just to listen again to the areas where you need clarity on. Alternatively, just drop me a comment in the email if you've got any questions. So yeah, guys, that's it. Have a productive week. Bless you all. Bye.